What is the best argument you've ever heard in your infinite number of debates, both online and in person, for the existence of God?
There are so many. I think there's even an argument for the existence of God that can be made just from the number of arguments for the existence of God. The fact that there's an argument from beauty, an argument from contingency, from ontology, from maths, from like any way you look, there's an argument for God. So you can always make an argument for God's existence from the sheer number of arguments for God's existence.
Haven't heard that before. That's great.
Depends what you mean. My favorite for a while has been the so-called ontological argument, where you sort of think God into existence. I think it's quite fun. You can just do it from an armchair. It doesn't require any observation. I mean, that's quite fun. I mean, it goes back to St. Anselm, who is praying. He's writing down this prayer. And he sort of challenges you in a way. He says, can you conceive of the greatest conceivable being? Just think of the greatest conceivable being.
Mm.
So whatever qualities it has, power, goodness, all this kind of stuff, just turn it up to the maximal conceivable amount, right?
Mm.
You got it in your head? You're picturing, you're thinking of just the greatest conceivable being? Okay, does that being exist in reality? Here's the problem. If you say no, then you're not doing what I asked you to. Because you can conceive of
But isn't that a limitation of the mind? I mean,
yeah, but
we talked about this in terms of the Baha'i faith, about God being the unknowable essence, and that men have created a God in their minds that they falsely worship, right?
But we're not talking about God. We're just talking about the greatest conceivable being, which by definition, you can conceive of. You just go to the ends of your conceivability.
Okay.
Now, Anselm's like, you can conceive of that being existing just in your mind, or existing in your mind and also in reality. So if the thing you're picturing is something like a really powerful, really loving, really, great being, it kind of approximates what people call God. You can imagine that either just existing in your mind as you're thinking about it, or maybe it exists in your mind, but it also exists in reality. But if it exists in reality and the mind, then it's greater. It's got more existence, right? And so when you're just asked to conceive of the greatest conceivable being, if you're not automatically thinking of a being that exists in reality, then you're not thinking of the greatest conceivable being. But because you can think of the greatest conceivable being by definition, you're automatically thinking of a being that exists in reality. Therefore, this God must exist in reality. It's my favorite because it sounds a bit stupid.
Stephen's that. You're not buying it. We can't.
He said, what about the greatest conceivable unicorn? This is the greatest objection to Anselm, as people say, oh, well, you're just thinking God into existence, because what about the greatest conceivable unicorn? Like, okay, but what you've just done is limited your scope. Because I asked you to imagine... the one on the mug.
Unicorn right here.
I was like, okay, imagine the greatest conceivable thing, right? And I'm like, that thing must exist in reality. Okay, well, the greatest conceivable unicorn has limited our scope, right? There could be a unicorn that you're imagining that's greater than another unicorn you're imagining, right? Okay, we can make that unicorn a better unicorn, like giving it a sharper horn and a more beautiful mane or whatever. But like, even if we imagine the greatest conceivable unicorn, we can make that unicorn a greater conceivable thing by giving it even more qualities. Well, let's make that unicorn all powerful,
telepathic, and
it doesn't make it a better unicorn, but it makes it a better thing, right? And so, like, the question is, does the unicorn existing in reality make it a better unicorn than just existing in the mind? And it seems like kind of not really, because the things that make a unicorn great are things like a nice mane, a pointy horn and stuff. And the one in your head has all of those things. It has all of the things that are the great making properties of a unicorn. It's all in the one that you're thinking of. And if it existed in reality, I don't know if that is a better great making property of a unicorn, right? Whereas if you're asking about the greatest conceivable thing, then you're maximizing all the properties, not just the unicorn making properties, but all properties a thing can have, including levels of existence. It's a bit much. Like it's why I sort of hesitate to bring it up, because it is my favorite, but it's a bit difficult.
But let's continue on that, because what comes to my mind, and we discussed this when I was on your pod, is I tried to be an atheist.
Yeah,
and I really spent a good couple years, at least, just really trying to exist in a world that inherently didn't have any meaning to it, or didn't have any kind of transcendent power beyond what could be kind of determined through scientific diagnosis. And it just didn't add up to me. It didn't make sense to me. It didn't work for me. It just didn't add up. I mean, I guess, what's the famous watch on the beach analogy of God.
Yeah, the teleological argument.
Yes, that
if
if you're walking along a beach and you see a perfectly functioning Swiss watch,
Yeah.
you're not going to go, oh, wow, all of these elements just fell together here on this beach and created this beautiful, perfect
Yeah.
watch that's incredibly, you'd be like, there's someone made the watch.
Yeah.
When I deeply imagine a three-dimensional universe made of, energy, but, matter and atoms and dark matter, and there was a big bang, and there's galaxies, and that it just happened, it just existed, it just sprang into existence, and that there are physical laws, and then somehow out of that chemistry became biology, and creatures were created, and there was paramecium, and then there was little amoebas and whatnot, and then they evolved into creatures, and somehow we have a creature and we have a large consciousness, and we're having this conversation over this podcast. When I think of the totality of that, without any kind of greater power or energy, it doesn't make sense to me, not just on a cognitive level. It just doesn't make sense in my heart. It doesn't make sense in my life experience. When I picture all of that with some kind of greater unknowable energy beyond time and space coursing through it, it makes total sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So does that go hand in hand with what you're talking about a conception of God? Because you can say, try and conceive of a universe without anything other than stuff and the properties that govern that stuff.
There are two things to say here. One is that, can we understand how things like emergent conscious experience just appear in this universe if there's no God? But also, can we understand how there's complexity without some kind of creator? On the first point, I saw a video the other day of a CPU in a computer, this tiny little microchip zoomed in on a microscope, and it's incredible. I mean, they are so tiny and just packed with little electronic functions. And I genuinely just don't understand how computers work. I do not understand how people get a bunch of metal and copper and stuff like this and sort of arrange it in a particular way, and you're able to sort of produce
you're able to watch this video on the YouTube channel, beamed over.
All of this is just because people have put atoms in the right order, doing things that now people can hear the words that we're saying.
Instead of a table or a shoe, it's a computer.
But and I'm like, that is an unfathomable mystery to me. Am I if I saw a computer for the first time, and I was playing chess with it, and it was talking back to me, and it was connected to the internet, and it allowed me to speak to my mother halfway across the globe or something, right? I said, what on earth is this? If you showed it to someone 200 years ago, they said, what is this magic? What is this sorcery? And you said, oh, it's just made out of metal and zeros and ones. They would literally just not believe you. They'd be like, that. I'm sorry, that doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. But the computer is in fact reducible to those metal objects just clanging into each other and producing this orders of magnitude more confusing and amazing.
But there weren't a bunch of molecules in a shoebox and you shook them up.
No.
And then it's like monkeys writing Shakespeare, and then you pull it out and there's a laptop.
By the way, they've actually done that research. Somebody put some monkeys in a room with a typewriter. It turns out that they don't type randomly. They had a fondness for the letter F or something. So you probably wouldn't get Shakespeare even with an infinite amount of time. But
that's cute.
So the other problem. So there's firstly can this all be reducible to the material? I struggle with that. I think that would be incredible if it were the case. But I think it's incredible to imagine that computers can do that, but we know that they do. The other question then is, where does that complexity come from? No matter whether you can create these incredible emergent things, why is there that complexity? Who put it that way? And of course, the problem with the watch analogy is that we don't believe that complexity, like biological complexity, just came about, just popped into existence. We believe that it evolved through natural selection. And so it'd be as if you saw this watch. It was incredibly complex. And then you discovered billions of years of watches which somehow were able to reproduce themselves. And every time they reproduced, they had slight differences. Sometimes they ran a little faster, sometimes a little slower. And for some reason, whichever ones were closer to accurately recording the time were more likely to keep reproducing.
Yes, but there's also
that would sort of do away with the mystery a bit.